All right, welcome back to the Relationship Comeback Podcast. This is episode 11, and you know how we do it at Utah Tech. We do it big, and today we have a very amazing professor coming on today, Professor Stein. Professor Stein, tell all of our millions of fans, tell them what's up.
Millions of fans. Oh boy, it's a lot of pressure. Well, yeah. So, my full title is Dr. James B. Stein. As I tell my students, I always go by James. I am now an associate professor at Utah Tech in the communication department, and my area of expertise is all about interpersonal communication, specifically romantic relationships. So, if you're at Utah Tech and you're taking a course like that, you're probably taking it with me. So that's where I come into it, and my area of research is a little bit more specific than just relationships. But I don't need to bore everyone with my program of research. If it comes up, maybe I'll bring it up. But just know that yeah, I study romantic relationships.
I mean, I think it's probably pretty clear I wouldn't have a professor on that I didn't enjoy their course, but I just want to, before diving into it, like my experience with education, I mentioned this with the other professor I'd had on from Utah Tech, like it's just been so up and down. And a lot of the times the down parts come from teachers that I can tell they don't care about us or they don't care about what they're teaching. And one thing that I really appreciate about you was there was both. Like, well, just for example, one of the classes we had, we did like a whole escape room, and it had everything to do with what we were talking about. And I'm just like most teachers just don't care that much. And it was so refreshing. Again, like I enjoy the course material, something I enjoy, but then on top of that, you can tell that you wanted what's best for us as well as you were willing to try. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And as well as it helped my teaching as well in my high school classes using some of your activities and things like that. So not only is he an expertise in this area, but he really cares about it. And so I'm excited for him to be able to share some of his thoughts with us.
Heck yeah. Well, and to be clear, the escape room activity is more of like a me thing, forcing my interests into the classroom. That one is a pet project. But yeah, I think it's important to be passionate, broadly speaking, about the things that you research. And it always makes me sad when I see teachers who aren't super passionate about the area that they teach in. And I don't know, maybe somewhere down the line that'll be me. But for now, I try to be as enthusiastic and motivated as I can.
Yeah, well, it makes a big difference. So thank you. Regarding this kind of field of study of interpersonal communication, especially within relationships, kind of what prompted you to maybe shift your focus in studies and research and teaching to that? Was there something that happened, or was it just kind of something that piqued your interest as you were going to college? Kind of how did you get started in that?
Yeah, well, so when I was in college, I was pretty directionless. The only thing I knew for sure is that I wanted my major to be communication. And it's just because it was something I was naturally gifted at. I've always been a very good public speaker and a good performer. I thought I was going to get into marketing. And after doing a number of internships in the private sector, I said, "Ooh, I don't know if I want to do this." What really did it for me is I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I didn't want to take the train every morning at 6:30 a.m. to New York City and then every evening back home. Not as glamorous as it looks, in the movies. So after I graduated, I said, "Oh boy, I don't think I want to work in the private sector. What am I good at? Like, what are my skills?" And I realized that, like, I looked at my GPA and I was like, "Well, I'm a C student, but I'm an A student in my major, so maybe I'm good at that." And next thing you know, I was in a master's program. And then next thing after that, I'm flying to Arizona to go get my PhD. And then all of a sudden, I'm living here in Utah. And it's just been a pretty wild ride. It happened kind of quick. But there was never really any one. There were a few big moments, right, that like pulled me in the direction that I ended up going in. A few really good professors who I was like, "Oh yeah, I want to emulate this person." But I didn't have a big calling to teach until I was about to start doing it. And then I realized, oh yeah, this is something that I'm good at. But like I said, it's all about like, anyone can teach, but like to
Mhm.
really like deliver information and help students, you got to care about the subject matter. And Romantic relationships have always interested me. I've personally been in a number of them, some good, some bad.
Congratulations. I don't
Yeah.
know what that's like, so no, I'm just
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, like, as you go through them, some are good and you're like, wow, that was amazing. And then some are bad and you're like, I wish I hadn't done that. Right.
yeah.
And so that was kind of the initial pull. And then when I started taking classes about interpersonal communication at the upper division level, I saw my life kind of connected to all of these theories and concepts and terms. I was like, oh my God, this is so relatable. And it just clicked for me. It just fit. So yeah, I kind of fell into it. But that's kind of how it happens sometimes.
That's at least for me, that's why I started going to Utah Tech for business, and I'm just
Hmm.
like going to these classes. I'm like, I'm just checking boxes here. Again, like communications, it's not like a rigorous like education path where you have to just like memorize crazy amounts of things. But so I think I did enjoy that. But like I'm also like I can actually see how this is interconnected into my actual life, and I felt like it was actually helping me. I always like to ask people this, not just like how did you get into it, but why do you continue to stay in it? Because I think those two questions might be a little bit different. So why do you continue to do it? Like you said, like, oh, I'm able to help students, but like day in and day out, why are you still motivated to stay in this field of study and help people in this manner?
That's a really good question. I mean, aside from the obvious answer of like, I need money, right? And I need to like support myself. I have some friends who left the profession of professing and got into the private sector, and they make a lot more money. Me personally, I'm fortunate enough that like, I don't have a lot of student debt, for example, and so I'm not panicked about money. And I stay because it gives me great work-life balance. And it gives me a good sense of community, as somebody who's not from Utah, right? I moved here after moving to Arizona from New Jersey. At the very least, you know what I mean? I can connect with my students and my colleagues at the professional level. And that gives me like a real sense of purpose. For example, when I have a student who reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I'm doing a podcast now, and like, your class really resonated with me, and I'd love to have you on." Like to me, like that's what keeps me doing
Mhm.
it. Or I'll get an email from a student and they'll be like, "You don't know me, but I was your student like 4 or 5 years ago, and here's how I took what you did and I like made a career out of it." And like I don't get that very often, but when I do, it's very encouraging and it just makes me remember that like, what we're doing here is not just distilling information, but like changing lives and helping people. So that's what keeps me going, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's one of my favorite things about teaching is again, like you don't get the big, celebrations, like look at all you've done, but every once in a while there'll be those moments where someone's like, "Hey, you really helped me." And I don't think there's a much more meaningful job than teaching if you're doing it right because I mean, you spend more time with those kids or those students than probably anyone. Like if you're in college, you're going to that class for 60 to 90 minutes 2 or 3 times a week, or like for me in high school these kids are there for an hour every other day, like you're spending a lot of time with these kids. If you're doing it right, it should be very meaningful. So I think that's definitely a reason to stay in it. So now we're going to get the chance to maybe hear some of James's, I won't call you Professor or Dr. Stein, but James's wisdom here. To me it kind of feels like if more young adults could understand nonverbal communication and some of the elements there, it would probably make early on dating communication, which is kind of what I want to talk about today, a little bit easier. To me, it seems a little bit like a superpower. Like if you can really understand people's body language, tone, vocalics, all those type of things, like it's going to make your ability to read people in situations a whole lot easier instead of just getting frustrated. So I'd be curious, or like how does understanding that impact somebody's ability to communicate early on in dating?
Yeah, well, I think you're totally right. It is definitely a superpower, and as they say, great power comes with great responsibility. And so, the first thing that, and this is something, of course, we talk about in class. The first thing that I always tell people is I say, one, there's no one single behavior that can definitely determine a person's motives or intentions.
Mm,
So, like for example, I'll see this scrolling on social media. It'll be some jerk and he'll be like, here's 3 ways to know if she's into you. And I'm like, that's okay. Immediate no, because he's promising you something that's just not supported by the data. But what you can do is you can understand how people tend to behave a lot of the time. And that can help guide you through your interactions. And I think this is especially useful for people who, for example, are like on the spectrum, right? And struggle with like understanding social cues and stuff like that. It allows you to compartmentalize things and break it down into a series of observable behaviors that you can connect with human emotions or human intent. And so broadly understanding what these behaviors are is very important. But at the micro level, it's exceedingly important to understand that we can't just watch someone, for example, shrug or look up and to the left and determine that like they're lying,
Mm,
right? Or we can't just determine that if someone's like making a prolonged eye contact with you, that that immediately means that they want to be in a relationship with you. But it could mean that the interaction is worth pursuing because there's a lot of things that determine that. For example, the way somebody makes eye contact with you, right? We're on a video medium, right? And so if you're on a date with someone, let's say a first date, and their gaze is soft, right? And they're looking into your eyes, that could be good. But if their gaze is firm and harsh and they're looking into your eyes, or if their body is closed off and they're still looking into your eyes, right? So not all eye contact is created equal. And you've got to be able to like absorb the various other cues around you. Anyway, all that to say, it's a very helpful process to determine what direction might I want to take a conversation in on something like a date, especially on a date like a first date where you don't know the other person very well, where you might want to fall back on norms or what we call schema, right? Things in our pathways in our brain that are sort of there already that we can draw from when we are uncertain or anxious or confused or when we don't know what to do. And so a broad knowledge of those types of behaviors are very useful in that regard. I don't know if you want to get into some of the more specifics, but that's my general pitch
yeah, I would
for.
just be curious, what are some of your cautions with it outside of just saying like one thing means like as someone trying to like get into it, like if you're someone you're like, I'm really struggling with first dates, because that's something I see a lot with my
Hmm.
friends is, you go on hundreds of first dates and maybe a couple of them go to second dates and you're like, man, I'm even myself included, like there's probably something I'm missing or there's something I'm not doing. And so you're curious about this, but what would be some of your cautions to be like, hey, before you go all in on trying to become Sean Spencer from Psych and you're just like reading everybody's mind and whatever, like before you do this, like just be aware of this.
I didn't know people were still watching Psych. I thought that that
I
was
I love that show.
I thought that that was well before your time. But yeah, no, that's a great point. The first thing I would say is that like at the intrapersonal level, meaning like in terms of you talking yourself up, one and really important thing to remember is that one, rejection is normal and it can be very good, right? So if you go on 50 dates and only a couple of people call you back, one really important thing to remember, big picture, is that that experience is happening for a lot of people,
Mhm.
right? It is, I mean, dating is hard, right? It is hard to find someone who syncs up with you in that way. And so normalizing rejection, right? Normalizing in these days, there's a lot of ghosting that goes on, right? Being okay with it and understanding that sometimes someone just doesn't want to talk to you is a very freeing feeling, right? Because now you're not like constantly texting them back and being like, where are you? Where'd you go? Like, right. And we don't want to do that because then that can come off as obsessive. And anyway, just handling rejection as a normal, ordinary part of life is big. In terms of actually interacting with people, I would say a few things that you really want to look out for are the way that they are positioning their body, right? And so I think this is especially true for men who date women. One of the things you really want to balance is I want to give this person space so that they don't feel like I'm on top of them or trying to
Mhm.
pressure them into physical contact. And also, I'd like to let them know that I'm interested in perhaps pursuing that physical contact. So, for example, in southern Utah, we have a very unique demographic here, right? The predominant religious group, the LDS folks, a little bit more modest than the bulk of the country, right? And so even if you're, if you're in the church, if you're out of the church, if you're a newcomer, if you don't know, right, you can use that as a default. And so you can ask somebody simply, what is your faith? If you, for example, if you met this person on Mutual, you already know,
Right.
right? So you already know that this person's probably going to be a little bit more modest from a physical contact perspective. And you can use that to guide your interactions so that you're not trying to, like, touch their thigh or put your arm around them or give them a kiss. They might not be ready for that on something like a first date. Whereas if you met somebody on, I don't know, Tinder, and they indicate that they're not part of the church, they might be a little bit more open to physical contact. And so what you can see here is we're using my personal favorite channel, the environment, right? We can make those assumptions without actually having to attempt to engage physically with this person. So what we're doing is we're saving a little bit of our face, right? We're not threatening our social standing. We're making assumptions. And sometimes those assumptions pay off, and sometimes it presents itself problematically where they're like, well, why didn't you go in for a kiss? And that's when you can say, oh, well, I just wanted to respect, I thought that maybe you would be a little bit more modest. And that could be a little awkward, but it's better than, for example, initiating that contact and experiencing face-to-face rejection, which can be very threatening. So the use of environment, the use of context clues is an overlooked channel of nonverbal communication. People focus so much on what are they like, what's their eye contact like, what's the tone of their voice, are they shifting closer or further away from me? A lot of those questions can be answered, or can at least get a partial answer from what are the contextual elements of this interaction? What do I know about this person that might indicate how they're behaving? And the more you learn about someone, the better you can assume or make sense of their behaviors. And so that's one thing to always look out for, that environmental cue. We often take it for granted, and we got to be sure. Oh, and I'll just put a little caveat on that. You may remember this from class. One thing I always ask in my nonverbal class is, hey, who would be up to go for a hike on a first date? Do you remember what happened when I asked your class that question?
I don't remember, but at least for me, I would hate it. But
So what happens usually is some people just don't like it, so they don't raise their hand. But there's usually a gender divide.
Mhm.
The men will raise their hand and the women will not. And then I'll say, why do we see that divide? And a woman will raise her hand and say, I don't know if I'm safe with this person. So, for example, that issue of safety is something that women have to think about that men don't have to think about.
Right.
And as a result, sure, maybe if she suggests a hike on the first date, great. But if you suggest that, you're bungling that environmental cue, because now you're putting her in a situation where she has to say yes or no to an extended alone time, right, with someone who she's never met before, and that can be potentially dangerous. And so being aware of those environmental cues, I think, is a big potential pitfall that a lot of people just miss and then don't even think about.
So what I'm hearing is do as much social media stalking as you can before the date to get as much environmental cues as you can to be able to help you out a little bit of where they're coming from. But I'm mostly joking, but a little bit it could be like trying to pick up on those. As far as maybe like you had mentioned, body language, tone, vocalics, what are some things to look for on a first date? Like if someone wants to start like implementing this, or even yourself, like trying to admit, positive, like, hey, I'm having a good time or things like that. How do we start to become more aware of this and use it to our advantage so that we're able to better communicate, even if it's not with our words?
Yeah, well, one thing you can always do is practice a sunny disposition. Stay positive, right, throughout the entire date. I've been on dates with people who I think they would have rather been on a date with a walking corpse. But I'm not going to let that ruin my time, right? I'm still going out on this date. I've offered to, pay for this experience. So I'm going to have fun with it, right? So I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to smile. I'm going to make that eye contact. And sometimes 10 minutes into a date, you can tell this person's just not feeling you. And so then you can shift into a more platonic situation, enjoy the experience, and then leave. But the way that you can determine that is primarily by listening to the way that they talk, right? Examining their vocalic tendencies. What is their inflection like, right? What kind of eye contact are they making? What is their body positioning like? Are they closed off and crossing their arms, or are they more laid back and open and relaxed? And again, no one of those behaviors can tell you exactly what you need to know, but you can take them in together. Another thing that you can do, something that you have a lot more agency over, is you can modulate your own expressions, right? I always tell my students it's useful to do facial exercises in front of the mirror so that you know what you look like when you smile. You can recognize how the muscles in your face feel when you frown or you furrow your brow, because the last thing you want to do is unintentionally communicate that you're uninterested in this person,
Mhm.
right? So especially if you struggle like I do with emotional expression, right? Maybe you feel things pretty well, but you struggle with expressing them. Doing something like facial exercises in the mirror can get you used to expressing something. And then when you're on a date, you can communicate your joy, your happiness, your playfulness in a way that is more noticeable, and that can be that can put people at ease. It can make people feel a little bit more comfortable, and it can let people know that you're enjoying the time that you're spending with them. And that's something again that's in your control. Something as simple as modulating your facial expressions and modulating your tone of voice so that you look and sound like you want to be there. And then, people tend to react to that in good ways.
Right. Well, and I think there's just a lot of nerves associated with first dates. And so any of those expressions are probably already going to be tempered down a little bit because you don't want to be like overly expressive and that might come across as uninterested. I think for me, I have a very like monotone voice, and I think potentially at times it comes across as I'm not interested. And I'm just like, no, this is just like how I talk. And so, like you're saying, trying to be more aware of like, all right, I want to try and express if I am having a good time, that I am having a good time, whether it's by smiling, whether it's by, and maybe you have to over accentuate it a little bit because you are, maybe a little nervous or maybe it's not totally natural, but you're like in a situation where there's, you're on a date for an hour or two. There's only so much communication. What can I do to make sure I'm portraying that I am interested? Or what can I do to make sure that I'm portraying that I am having a good time?
Yeah, yeah, and like, sometimes that means verbally stating it, right?
Hmm.
Uh if especially if you struggle with expressiveness, like a lot of folks do. So yeah, that could be a very, very useful tool in your toolkit to like explicitly remind the person that you're having a good time. And then, like you said, that'll take some of the burden off of your physical arousal. One thing I always talk about when I teach public speaking is speaker's energy, right? A lot of people don't like public speaking. They get nervous, they start sweating, their heart rate increases. But those are all things that happen when you're having a good time too. For example, if you're playing your favorite sport, you're sweating, you're nervous because, I don't know, maybe there's a big shot coming up, your heart is racing, but you're having a good time, right? And so if you can recognize these physical cues and transform them into a positive, it takes work, right? You got to practice at it.
Hmm.
But then something like a first date, you get excited for it, right? The heart starts pumping, and instead of saying, "Oh my God, I'm so nervous, I'm gonna blow it," you say, "I'm so excited to meet a new person." And I don't want to come off as like, oh, manifesting or like, grind setting my way into a good, successful first date, but like, there's a lot to be said about things like self-talk and taking those, again, those nonverbal physical signs in yourself that you're noticing and transforming them into a positive rather than a negative. The blend between the brain and the body's physical reaction is very copacetic. It's very, they're very intertwined with each other. And so, you got to train them both at the same time. And it just takes practice.
Right. No, I remember I had a buddy tell me, he's like, if you like break down the feelings of when you're anxious versus when you're excited, he's like, it's very similar, or
Yeah.
maybe not anxious, but maybe more nervous. But he's just like, it's so similar. And in my mind, I was like, they basically are kind of the same thing. It's just how your brain is labeling them. And for
Yep.
me, that was
Exactly.
super helpful to be like, okay, if I am feeling nervous, it probably just means I'm a little bit excited for what's ever going on, or there's something important happening. There's a lot of meaning here, and trying to shift that a little bit, I think was super helpful. So I think it's important to uh, distinguish those two or help you understand they're maybe not as different as we think they are. Kind of getting into our next point here. What are some of the pitfalls you see young adults falling into as far as their communication patterns go? Especially early on in dating, like I had sent a few examples of like texting too much before the first date, texting too little, not texting enough, like all these different things, ghosting, setting expectations too soon, setting them too late. What are some of these pitfalls that you're like, man, this is really causing issues here, or this is not happening and that's causing issues? What are some of
Mhm.
the pitfalls you see young adults falling into kind of in this world of difficult dating?
Yeah. So one thing I see a lot of is people treating dates like they are a business transaction, right? The transactional approach is great when understanding the theory of human communication, but when you are interacting with other people, it is not usually very successful because people can sense when you're treating things like it's, a negotiation rather than an interaction. And so I'll give a couple of examples. I have seen folks freak out about the cost of a date, right? Most people don't have a ton of money, especially young adults,
Hmm.
right? College kids, we're all broke, right? I had no money when I was in college. Nobody does, right? And I think that people get in their heads about, well, if I don't take this person out to like a really nice fancy place, they're going to think I'm a broke boy and that I suck and that I'm not worth dating. They're probably broke too. You know what I mean? They probably don't got it like that either. And so, like, something that can feel very threatening, but is ultimately something that people don't really care about, is just acknowledging that straight up. Right. And instead of being like, oh, I want to take you out to this really nice place where we can get like, a tomahawk steak and a guy will like cover it in gold and then cut it in front of us. You can just be like, look, I'd really like to like get to know you. Maybe we can get a coffee or a soda or like, indicate like I'm in college. I just don't have that much
Hmm.
money to spend, but I'm very interested in spending time with you. And I think the lack of focus on material items, shifting that focus to the person will usually go well. Now, some people are going to be like, no, I don't want that. I don't want to date someone who can't spend a lot of money on me. And you know what? That person will probably find someone who spends a lot of money on them, and it just might not be you, right? So, shifting the focus from the things or what is being done to the person, I think is a very important. And that doesn't mean you got to cheap out on every date, right?
Hmm.
It means focusing on what the person wants, right? Treating them like a human being who has wants and needs and who you're genuinely interested in getting to know. Um, and so that's good because it saves us money, but it also allows you to communicate to this person that I am interested in like learning about you and getting to know you. I don't really care what we're doing as long as we're doing something together. And odds are, if this person is having this conversation with you, they're already interested in you. They already are interested in getting to know you. And so all you can do from there is either it works out or it doesn't work out. And it really shouldn't matter what you are doing. That said, there are a couple of things, like a couple of dates that I would not recommend, like movies are tough because they prevent communication. But
Hmm.
on the whole, I would definitely avoid treating it like a business transaction. And I would also avoid treating it like a conquest, right? I think especially with men, there's a lot of pressure to engage physically, intimately with especially young women. And I don't think we need to put that much pressure on ourselves as men. I think that if we can take like a genuine interest in learning about this person, it'll probably go a longer way than trying to like be some sort of like slick pickup artist who like knows all the right things to say. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to like present yourself in that fake light just because you think you have to, get a kiss at the end of the night. And if you didn't, it's not a successful date. You just get to know someone,
Hmm.
right? At any different level. And sometimes it stays platonic and sometimes it becomes romantic. So avoiding the transactional nature and avoiding the conquest element of it all. I think that removes a lot of pressure and it also allows you to focus on the person that you are with, which will usually be to your benefit.
What are, because, like for me, like one of the things that I have a hard time with in early on dating is like at some point you gotta like set up a time to
Mm.
talk or plan it. You gotta figure out a time where you're both available, and that feels so business-like. It's like, hey, here's my, team's calendar. I can fit you in here, here, and here. And it to me, it takes a lot of like I don't know. Is there a way to do that less transactionally to make it more like you're saying, like, hey, I'm genuinely trying to find a time to get to know you? Like, what are some of your tips on trying to help maybe the setup or like the initial, like, hey, we matched on this app, we're trying to figure out a time because it kind of does take the spark away a little bit of like, oh, here's my calendar, and it's like that's not sexy at all. So like, how do we do that maybe in a more like genuine way?
Yeah, there's a couple of techniques. One is you could just start listing times that work for you, right? Hey, so yeah, I remember you said you really like going to, I don't know, I'm just gonna make something up. You like really going to Color Me Mine. I like it too. Uh, Thursday at 3, I have a break in between classes. And then they might be like, "Oh, I have class then." And then you can be like, "How about Wednesday at 3?" Right? Um, and in my experience, anecdotally speaking, if somebody has an excuse for every single time you list, this comes to another one of those nonverbal channels that
Mhm.
people don't pay attention to, chronemics, the use of time. If you keep listing times and somebody keeps having a reason that they can't meet, it might be an indication that they're not interested and that they're just being polite. People who want to see you will prioritize you. Now, that doesn't mean you should suggest something, and then if they say that doesn't work for me, you should just throw up your hands and say, "Ah, well, I tried." Right? I'm talking about looking for patterns, right? If someone cancels a date once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, they're probably not prioritizing you, and that's likely not someone who you should be showing interest in, right? Alternatively, if you suggest a time and they say yes, well, mission accomplished, right? Another thing you can do is you could say, are there any days that are especially good or bad for you, right? This is a little bit more of a vague proposal, right? So you're not saying, here's my schedule, here's my calendar, but you're saying, hey, are there any days that work best for you? And they go, well, you know what? Tuesdays and Thursdays, I got class all day, but everything else is pretty much open. And you say, okay, well, what about Friday afternoon or what about Wednesday evening? And then you can just kind of position them with slightly more vague times because Wednesday evening could mean 5:30 p.m. It could mean 8:30 p.m. And you're giving them a little bit of agency in terms of making a window. And then, of course, it also depends on what you're doing, which is something I like to set up first, right? What are your interests? What's something you'd like to do? You like to hike? I like to hike. Or no, hiking is a bad example. Given
Yeah.
my advice, okay, you're big on coffee. I'm big on coffee. Have you been to every Feel Love location? And then they go, oh yeah, I've been to the one downtown, and I went to the one on Riverside. And then you go, well, did you know there's one right by Snow Canyon? They go, oh, I did not know that. And you go, we should go, right? That kind of thing where you're focusing on the activity in question. And it's, ideally, again, a low stakes activity, something in public, something that doesn't make someone feel like trapped or confused, not necessarily trying something new. That's more third, fourth date material, right? And so focusing on the activity can present a natural window of time. We're not getting coffee at 10:30 at night,
Right.
right? We're getting coffee in the afternoon. Uh, so focusing on the activity and then either just proposing a time that works for you and hoping it works for them, or vaguely saying, a day and a window, allowing them the agency to help you make the choice. Those are a couple of strategies.
What are your thoughts on texting versus calling and even like setting up a date or getting to know somebody or even in like kind of second or third dates? Kind of what do you think a good balance is between the two? Because I'm just getting more to the point. I don't even want to text people. I'm just going to call. But like that's a lot of pressure. So what are your thoughts on those two and kind of balancing those?
I would always ask. I would say one of the first things I would ask is, are you a texter or are you a caller? And I would just, especially when getting to know someone, meet them where they're at, right? Make it easier on them. I personally, I'm a texter, right? And I have in the past dated people who were phone callers. And that's all right with me. I don't mind as long as I'm not busy, right? So if I'm driving from here to Vegas, well, that's perfect. Okay, call you up real quick, say hi. Um, I would ask them, and then I would resist the urge to play that texting game that everybody plays, where you text them and then it takes them 2.5 hours to text you back, and you're like, okay, now how long do I wait? You could just text someone back, right? Maybe not immediately after, right? Maybe wait a good few minutes, but like resisting that urge will one communicate to them that you care about them, that you're prioritizing them. If they go 3, 4 hours and text you back and you hit them back 15 minutes later, it means you're paying attention to what they're saying and you care about them. And if you're just consistent with that every time, or maybe you're gone away from your phone for a couple of hours, just not thinking about it too much. I hate that game, right? Show this person that you prioritize them by not making them wait forever to receive your text messages. Um, but yeah, I would certainly see where they're at and just match them, right? Or mimic them. Mirroring is what we would call it in nonverbal communication. Mirror their efforts.
Yeah, well, I think like you're saying, almost try and take the path of least resistance. At least for me, like anytime there's some form of resistance, it seems like, especially if you're meeting on apps, like because there's
Hmm.
just such low commitment levels on those apps. And so if there's any type of resistance, I'm just like, it's probably not happening. And so you're saying is trying to get rid of those barriers to that resistance to allow a successful date to happen. Kind of before we move to the next point, what do we do about ghosting? That's to me, that's like a huge pitfall that I see. And maybe not that it's a right or wrong thing happening, but it is something that is happening in the dating world that is causing a lot of hurt. It's causing a lot of burnout. It's causing a lot of, people going to therapy. So what are your just overall thoughts on this and maybe just things to be aware of or just your opinion on where we're headed with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, ghosting happens, right? It is a result of what we call the disinhibition effect, which is broadly sometimes people just act differently online than they do in person. I've been ghosted back when I was in my prime dating. And I have ghosted other people, which is not something I'm proud of, but sometimes it has to be that way. This comes back to normalizing rejection, I think. Yeah, if someone ghosts you, fuck them. You know what I mean? Um, it is what it is. I have been ghosted, and then they've showed up 3 days later and been like, "Sorry, I was really busy," and I'm like, "Cool, I'm still down to go out if you are." And then sometimes they'll say yes, and then sometimes they'll ghost again, and I'm like, "All right, then that's that." Um, just understanding that that is a part of dating, I think goes a long way because the last thing we want to do is take it personally. Usually, we're not getting ghosted because of something we did wrong. It's usually a decision that another person is making, right? So that's the step number one.
Mhm.
And step number two is this is probably going to sound backward, but I would say leave room for ghosting. Allow it to happen. Sometimes people ghost because they got their own trauma going on and they feel unsafe talking to certain people. And it's nothing in your control and they just need to do it for themselves, right? So, this is another thing I would recommend when let's say you meet someone on a dating app, ask them what medium, what channel they'd prefer to communicate through. Hey, would you prefer to keep talking here, or would you like to text on Snapchat? Would you like to text via SMS? Right? I can give you my number if you'd like. And I think again, especially with men, there is this weird stereotype where we are supposed to ask women for their number. But if you offer up your number instead, you give them the freedom to say, "Oh, I'd rather chat here," or "Oh, I'd rather go through Snapchat or whatever."
Mhm.
Um, One thing you can do is do the first date rule, which is we talk through the app until we've met in person. And you can tell someone like, "Hey, I'd like to keep talking to you. I don't feel comfortable giving out my number until I've met someone in person. So would you like to meet up in person?" Right? And that can be an avenue into getting something like a date. But in terms of ghosting, it just happens. You know what I mean? You could spend all day and night trying to figure out why someone ghosted you. And at the end of the day, it's probably not worth your time. You're probably better off moving on to someone who will pay attention to you and prioritize you. This is once again the importance of chronemics. How are you going to spend your time? Do you want to ruminate over somebody who hasn't texted you back in a week? Or do you want to move on to the next person who maybe seems a little bit more interested in you? These are questions that are worth asking. And sometimes somebody might be worth chasing a little bit more, but it's also worth knowing when to stop pursuing, right? So ghosting happens. It sucks. Nobody likes it, but it is simply a part of modern dating. And if we can normalize it and get used to it, we won't take it as personally. And then, in all likelihood, we won't be as offended when it happens to us. And we won't feel as guilty when we do it to other people.
Right. Well, I think, and I don't know the proper way to phrase this, but like I'm almost at the point, I'm just gonna put it on, my dating profile. Like I'm really into chronemics. Like show me like that, like I want your time or your whatever. Like to me, that seems like a huge part of like of nonverbal communication is like where are their efforts showing, where are they putting their time, and I think that ghosting, like you're saying, if that's happening, then you're getting all worked up over it. Causes you to misuse your time and you're spending
Mhm.
it in a place where it's probably not super helpful or healthy. So I
Yeah.
might use that one.
Back when I was in my mid 20s and I was on Tinder, I had in my profile at one point, quote unquote, I'm a fast texter, just to let people know I reply fast. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that like worked in terms of dating, but yeah, letting people know your tendencies works, right? Like saying like, hey, just so you know, like I'm an iPad baby, my fault. Like, you know what I mean? Like I will see your text and I will text you back. You can take as long as you need to text me back and I won't be offended. Even stating something like that explicitly can help put people at ease. And I think that this is another one of those things that's worth prioritizing, putting people at ease. Again, especially if you're a man who dates women, you know what I mean? Saying things like, well, I'd love to go out, like, I'd love to go out on a hike, but one thing I want to do is make sure you feel comfortable.
Hmm.
And so whatever you want to do is good with me. Openly and explicitly stating that your primary objective is to make this person feel comfortable or safe or you know what I mean? Like not putting pressure on them, that goes a long way, right? Instead of being like, oh, well, it would be so much more fun if we did this. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. How do you like? Are you comfortable with meeting up here? Are you comfortable with going out for a drink? Are you comfortable with going out for a hike? That word, using the word comfortable, right, can help a lot because it lets people know, again, what you prioritize.
Are there any expectations that you would avoid setting too early on? They maybe even just in like relationship settings, or you're like, we should do more of this. Like you're saying, setting expectations of I want to make sure, especially as a man, like I want to make sure you feel comfortable. I want to make sure you feel safe. I think that's a great tip. Are there any other tips of to-dos, or are there any things you're like, we probably should stop doing this too soon?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of expectations. I
Mhm.
like setting them up, especially explicit expectations, right? Um, this is why in my classes, I tell my students on every single syllabus, here are things that you can expect of me, and here are some things I expect from you. I actually am eliminating that part of my syllabus. I'm replacing it with something else, but that's not the point. The point is, I like setting expectations because then if something goes wrong, we all know that something went wrong, right? And so when it comes to dating, you know, I expect conversation. I expect a good time. I don't expect sexual interaction, right? I will take intimate contact if I get it, but I don't expect it. And so therefore, when I go out with somebody, I don't have that. That's not even like really a thought in my mind. I'm not even
Mhm.
thinking about it. It's not even there for me. And I think that that can often come off as quite confident, right? Somebody who is very clearly just there to enjoy the experience is going to come off as much more relaxed and much more enjoyable to be around than somebody who feels like I'm on a date. I need to, right? Like we don't want to put all that pressure on ourselves. That said, setting expectations is a good idea, even if it's something as simple as yeah, I'm down to go out at 3. I have something going on at 5, so I'm only available for about an hour, hour and a half. Is that okay? Right? So again, letting them know, hey, this is how long I expect to be out, right? Or if you're going out to eat, and let's say you do have some extra money, you're like, well, I've always wanted to get this, so like we can get like a really cool meal if you want to. Like setting that expectation gives people something to look forward to.
Mhm. Yeah, no, at least for me, like anytime I feel kind of dissonance in a relationship, it to me, it usually boils back down to a failed expectation, at least whether it was made up or whether it was verbalized. And so for me, I try and make sure that I'm setting expectations and again, is there any way to do it like I don't the only word that I can is there any way to do it sexy? Like, is there any way to do it that it again it doesn't feel like, hey, here's my expectations for blah 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 blah. Like is there any way to do this in a more normal, natural way that feels genuine, that feels like, hey, I care about you or this potential relationship? Is there any tips you'd give on trying to do that in a more, you know, this isn't a business thing. I'm trying to make sure I'm setting us up for a potential successful relationship or date.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the subject at hand, right? So if you're talking about sex, for example, expectations, explicit expectations are going to be real important, right? So for example, again, if we take the predominant culture here, people are a little bit less sex oriented here, right? And so setting that expectation clearly, or, especially if you're a man who dates women, allowing them to set the expectation, right? And sometimes that just involves direct questioning,
Hmm.
right? And being like, so, for example, I noticed that you are part of the LDS church. can you talk to me about your stance on intimacy? Right. And that is kind of awkward, but you're going to get the information that you need. And so if you're somebody who's looking for casual dating and sex, and this person's like, well, I believe in the importance of saving sex till marriage. Okay. Maybe that's not the right person to date then. But the last thing we want to do, again, is treat it like, oh, I can get them to change their expectations regarding sex. That is predatory behavior, and we want to avoid that for sure. So it depends, right? But if it's something like, how many dates until we're exclusive? Well, that would be worth knowing, right? And so you can just ask somebody, tell me about your dating style. Do you like to date
Hmm.
multiple people at once? Are you a bit more monogamous? Um, and you can offer up your stance on it first, right? But yeah, that's the kind of thing where it's like it's an explicit question, and it's not. I wouldn't necessarily call it sexy to do that sort of thing, but I would say that it is definitely transparent and it is open, and I think it goes a longer way than more folks give it credit for in terms of making people feel safe and comfortable. Because if someone says, yeah, I typically just date one person at a time, now you know where they stand
Right.
and you can meet them where they're at. And you could say, great, that's cool. I'm down with that. And I'd like to get to know you more. Or you can be like, not my vibe. My bad. Right.
Right.
And then you're moving on. So question asking is a great way to set expectations. Obviously there's a line to walk, right? You don't want to ask a million questions like that on day one. So you do have to go with the flow a little bit, right? But again, lean back on norms, right? Lean back on what you know about dating broadly. That can often help, and let this person tell you what they're into, and then adapt, adapt to what they're into. And that'll also show that you're capable of altering your state of mind and your perspectives in a way that caters to them. And people typically like that.
And I mentioned this on a previous episode, but one of the things I'll do on dating apps that I saw on, I don't use all of his stuff, but he's like one of those wingman guys that try to help you be super smooth on Instagram. But one of his lines is like, "What are you looking for on here?" And I love that question, especially on a dating app, because it allows you to set that expectation pretty early on, and it allows you to be like, hey, are they looking for a hookup or are they looking to go on dates and try and find someone? To me, that's been a really helpful question of trying to it's a question that also sets expectations. And to me, that feels more natural than just being like, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Do you vibe with that? And it's like that maybe is not the best way. Like you're saying, asking them first, and then either you match that energy or it's something that you're like, this probably isn't going to be for the best.
Yeah, well, what you definitely don't want to do is hop on a dating app and being like looking for a wife and kids. Like
Yeah.
that's gonna like right that is an expectation violation. And then on the other end, unfortunately, the specific phrase "what are you looking for," I think can sometimes come off as, I don't want to say desperate, but it can come off as the type of person who's trying to get a very specific answer.
Mm.
So I like the question. I think that you might want to modulate the word choice a little bit to something that is more playful, right? And so instead of saying, well, what are you looking for? You could say, tell me about your dating style, right? Or like, I don't know, just like making fun of dating in general, right? And being like, oh, here I am again, right? Like on another app. Boy, sure, I sure hope it works this time. Like, you know what I mean? Play off of their vibe, you know? Um, I think that if you hop on and ask someone, what are you looking for? You run the risk of communicating to them that you might be looking for something, and then they're going to start making assumptions that you might not want them to make. So, yeah, I like tell me your dating style a
Mm.
little bit more because it allows for I think it puts a little bit less pressure on them, right? Tell me about your dating style. Do you like to date multiple people at once? Do you find that you're quick to jump into relationships? That kind of thing.
No, I like that refinement. It's a little less pressure filled. Again, anything you can do to try and take that pressure out of it is probably a good thing to do, and it allows them to kind of take the lead on how many expectations or how many uh things about my dating style do I want to share, and then you can kind of feel it out from there of like, oh, okay, like I vibe with that, or that's something I'm not necessarily into. Kind of wrapping up, what are in your expertise and all of your years of studying and especially I think you bring a unique perspective because you spend so much time with kids that are young single adults, and you're just like constantly in the weeds with them. And I'm sure you have kids stay after and talk to you about stuff. And so like you kind
I
of
get it.
know,
Let me tell you something. I get that a lot less here than I did in Arizona. I used to have
really.
students walking into my office hours when I worked at Arizona State. They would walk into my office hours and they would go, "I'm dating somebody and I don't know if it's working out. Can I ask you for your advice?" And then have to be like, "Okay, I'm not a therapist, but if you really want to vent to somebody, I understand healthcare is expensive, so I guess you can."
Right.
But I don't get that much here, which I'm kind of thankful for because it can be awkward. But yeah, sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
yeah.
So
But you I again like the struggles of what's going on, as well as you've been in and out of the dating scene yourself in this kind of modern age. And so what do you think we can start doing, especially in a communication sphere of things, to start to make
Mhm.
this a more healthy environment where, like you're saying, hopefully I don't need to go and get healthcare because of the dating experiences that I'm having. Like what can we start to do to maybe make this a more healthy environment? Because to me, that's the point of this whole podcast, is just try and start a conversation to make it a healthy environment for everybody involved. Because I'm so sick of myself and my friends or family members, just like you can just tell this is not good for them to continue to be in this. So what can I do to change that? So if you were in charge, the president of the dating world, what would be some of the changes you'd make, or things that you're like, we need to start doing this and things like that?
Yeah, there's a few as president of dating world. There's probably a few policies I'd implement. A big one would just be the importance of like reciprocity and listening, right? So, for example, never ask someone a question that you wouldn't want to answer yourself. One question I see so much on like all the worst sides of social media is men will ask women questions like, "What's your body count?" Which is a question that you want to stay so far away from. One, because it's genuinely none of your business, but two, because like women specifically are on the lookout for men who ask questions like that. And if you ask a question like that, you're cooked. It's over. You know what I mean? In 10 minutes, you're done.
Mhm.
So there are problematic questions that you can ask, specifically asking women about their bodies, that will be harmful. I would avoid asking women questions about their bodies in general and allow them to share information as it comes along. And so again, I would prioritize like the listening and the reciprocity, meeting people where they're at. What do you want to talk about? I can talk about that, right? Um, Policy number two, like we've already talked about, is I would definitely do everything in my power to loosen the pressure and allow a date to just be a date. You know, um, there is no secret combination that works on every single person you're trying to date. You got to just like genuinely learn about them and get to know them and accept when you're not a great match with someone, even if they're super hot. You know what I mean? And then I think the third one that I would probably implement, aside from normalizing rejection, I think that that's a big one. But the third big one that I would implement as it pertains to like fixing dating would be to simply allow dating to be an ordinary experience. I feel like we put it on a pedestal. When we have a date, we treat it like a contest we've won. And, if you take my conflict course, you will note that treating things like a competition is great if you're an athlete and pretty much bad in every other scenario. So treating it like a game, treating it like a competition, treating it like something you have won or earned, those are all behaviors I would stay away from because it's just a person. You know what I mean? Like it is a person who ideally you want to get to know and enjoy your time with. I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many men in my life I know who just don't like women but want to date women. And I'm like, well, why do you want to date women if you don't like them? And they go, because I think they're hot. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't want to date women. You want to sleep with women. And that's something that there is a group of people out there more than willing to do. And this is where the expectations come into play, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I would search for someone whose company and presence you enjoy, as well as somebody who is attractive to you. And as we talk about nonverbal calm, attraction comes in many different forms: physical, sexual, social, and a whole gauntlet, right? So normalize liking the person that you're dating would be my final policy.
Yeah, no, I think at least one theme that I'm getting from this is dating might not be sexy. Maybe it's not supposed to be. We're trying to normalize it.
There's a
Maybe
oh no, there's
normalize it
definitely a
being
part.
normal.
There's a part where it is sexy. There's a part where it is sexy, but right out of the jump, almost never. Sometimes you meet somebody who's very hot
Mhm.
and they are like a horny little gremlin, and so are you, and right, and you just start having sexual conversations immediately. But yeah, a lot of the initial part of dating is just being like, do I even like this person? Can I tolerate them? Because like, how are you gonna find someone sexy if you're not into them
Right.
in any regard, right?
Normalize normal dating. Like
Yeah,
it's okay
normalize.
for it to be normal.
Yeah, it is okay for dating to occur. It is okay for a date to go quote unquote poorly. It is okay to go on a date with someone and not have any physical contact with them. It is okay to go on a date with someone and sleep with them that night, right? Now, if you have personal constraints that prevent you
Right.
from doing that, that's a different story and that's totally cool too. But the point is that dates come in many different shapes and sizes. And when we try to like stuff them into one category of living, that's where we can do damage. And that's where we can, you're right. So expectations are good and is also good to be fluid and to treat dating like just a normal part of life.
I would love your thoughts and on any Utah specific one. You can be as open or honest as you want. Like I'm not going to get my feelings hurt because to me, I'm just like I want the honest truth about because again, I think there is a difficulty in Utah that's different than anywhere else because of the religious pressure that is attached to dating. And so, I mean, like you get on to Provo, TikTok dating stories, and it is just like it is like wild. I'm like, how in the world is this like reality? What would be if you were the mayor of Utah, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints dating? What from an outside observer,
Yeah.
any changes that you're like, man, y'all are missing the point on this one, or you need to
Yes.
start doing this? I would just love your quick thoughts on that.
I got one big one. Stop getting married so quickly. Just stop. Just stop getting married so quickly. I cannot tell you how many times I'll meet someone, I'll be teaching a freshman class, and I'll be like, "Hi there, introduce yourself." And someone will be like, "My name is Brinley. I turn 18 next week. I'm getting married next month." I'm going to tell you this. If you have met the love of your life, it does not matter if you marry them tomorrow or in 5 years,
Hmm.
right? So once you marry somebody, there is now legal documentation. There is like, you need a lawyer to get away from this person. And when you do that at like 18, 19, 20, you're putting yourself at risk, right? So I would say there's absolutely nothing wrong with being monogamous. There is nothing wrong with being in a long-term relationship. I would say stop getting married so early. It's just not good for anyone. And I just don't know too many 19-year-olds who are like desperate for the tax breaks that come with marriage, you know? So like I would say if you're going to be with this person, be with this person, right? And don't fall victim to this idea of, oh, the relationship is not real unless we get married. The relationship is as real as you and your partner make it. That would be my recommendation. Because I'm not talking about like, the religion per se. I'm talking about people, like what's
Right.
best for people. And marriage can be a very good thing, both financially and in terms of like security. It can make you feel closer to this person. You get to celebrate this person. Um, and yeah, I would say if you fall in love with someone at 20, what do you care if you don't get married till 26, 27? What do you care? You know what I mean? Or 30, who knows? I would ease up on that desire to get married because the last thing you want to do is get married to someone, have children with them, and then you turn around, you're 28, and you're like, wait, I don't even like this person. And now there's other lives at stake. So I would say there's nothing wrong with getting married.
Right.
Just don't rush into it.
Yeah, no, and I think that pressure again, you hear the stories of, I met somebody 3 weeks ago, and now we're engaged and we're getting married, and again, even if you're not expecting that, I think if you're dating in a culture where that's happening more frequently, then I mean, it might
Yes.
not be common, but that's in the back of both y'all's minds.
Yep.
That's in the back of that's in you're like this I guess technically it could happen because we live in a place where it does and that's probably just not a helpful mindset to have anywhere in your headspace. If that does happen, whatever, great. But like
Mhm.
if you're expecting that or even, that this could be a possibility, that just I'm sure it just adds so much pressure to any situation for both people of like, oh man, this is kind of like we got to figure this out soon. But like you're saying, if I find my person if it's right, we'll figure out we'll get married at some point. There's no need to like get married here in 2 or 3 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, right? You don't want that pressure, and you're totally right that, when you're in this sort of environment, you run the risk of seeing, well, everyone around me is getting married. I'm 22 and all of my friends are married. And so there's a time to fall back on norms and then there's a time to do what's best for you. And that balance is important. So that would be, in a vacuum, that would be my advice. Don't rush the marriage. Marriage can happen whenever you need it to happen. It does not need to happen 2 weeks after your Trailblazers orientation, right?
I like that. Well, thank you again for spending some time with us, giving us your professional thoughts and opinions on this crazy world. And again, it's super meaningful to me to have these conversations. So I appreciate you providing me the opportunity to do that and sharing some incredible wisdom and things like that. If somebody does have a question, do you have like a professor email or anything that you'd be willing to give out or anything like that? If somebody has a question or anything like that, would you be comfortable with that or not really?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, look, if for example, if a student has a question about anything that we've talked about today, they can email me. It's my first name, James dot Stein, my last name, James dot Stein at utahtech.edu. Um, and yeah, that's really the only capacity in which I'm available. But yeah, if anyone is just interested in learning more about the science of relationships, or even if there's students listening to this being like, "Whoa, who's this guy, and how do I take his class?"
Mhm.
You drop me a line, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much. This has been episode 11, where we're learning to become the one so we can attract the one. We'll see y'all next time.
All right, take care.